I still remember that Saturday afternoon like it was yesterday, even though it happened 15 years ago. I was 35 years old, excited and nervous about finding the perfect dress for my cousin's wedding. I had saved money for months to buy something beautiful, something that would make me feel confident and radiant. David's bridal seemed like the obvious choice. Everyone said they had options for all body types, all sizes. How wrong I was about to discover that assumption could be. I walked through those glass doors with hope in my heart, wearing my favorite black jeans and a floral blouse that always made me feel pretty. My size 24 body moved with determination as I browsed through the racks, looking for something in my size. The store was busy that day, filled with excited brides-to-be, bridesmaids, and mothers helping their daughters find their dream dresses. The energy should have been infectious, but instead I began to notice the stares, the whispered conversations that seemed to follow me as I moved through the store. After browsing for about 20 minutes, I approached the front desk where a tall, blonde manager was organizing some paperwork. She looked up at me with cold, calculating eyes, and what happened next would haunt me for years, but also become the catalyst for the most transformative period of my life. Without lowering her voice, without any attempt at discretion, she looked directly at me and announced loudly enough for everyone in that crowded store to hear, "We don't carry clothes for you, obese black woman. This store is for people who actually fit into wedding attire." The words hit me like physical blows. Every conversation in the store stopped. Every eye turned toward me. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my hands trembling as I clutched my purse tighter. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft music playing overhead and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to disappear, to run out of that store and never show my face anywhere again. The humiliation was overwhelming, crushing, complete. But then something unexpected happened. A woman I had never seen before, a petite white woman who couldn't have been more than 25, stepped forward from where she had been looking at bridesmaid dresses with what appeared to be her sister. Her face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She marched right up to that manager and said in a voice that carried throughout the entire store, "How dare you speak to her that way? How absolutely dare you? If this story of a plus-size woman's courage is already moving you, leave your like now so more people can watch this video." Before that devastating day at David's bridal, I was living a life that I thought was full and complete. But looking back now, I realize I was hiding from so many possibilities. My name is Maya, and I had spent the first 35 years of my life as a public school teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. I loved my job, truly loved it. There was nothing quite like seeing a child's eyes light up when they finally grasped a concept they'd been struggling with, or watching a shy student find their voice during a classroom discussion about literature or history. I had been teaching for 12 years by that point, working primarily with middle school students who were navigating their own complex relationships with identity and self-worth. Ironically, I spent my days encouraging these young people to believe in themselves, to stand up for what was right, to never let anyone make them feel less than worthy. Yet I had never fully applied those lessons to my own life. I was the teacher who stayed after school to help struggling students, who bought supplies with my own money when the school budget fell short, who attended every graduation ceremony because I knew some of my former students wouldn't have family there to cheer them on. My personal life was quiet, perhaps too quiet. I lived alone in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment that I had decorated with books, plants, and artwork from local artists. I had a small circle of close friends, mostly other teachers who understood the demands of our profession. We would meet for dinner once a month, go to the occasional movie, and support each other through the challenges of working in an underfunded school system. I attended church regularly at the same Baptist church my family had attended for generations, sitting in the same pew every Sunday, participating in the choir despite my self-consciousness about being one of the larger women in the group. Dating had been challenging throughout my 20s and 30s. I had convinced myself that my worth was tied up in my career success and my ability to help others, but deep down, I longed for partnership, for someone who would see past my size to the passionate, intelligent, caring woman underneath. I had been in a few relationships over the years, but they always seemed to fizzle out, leaving me wondering if I would ever find someone who truly accepted and loved all of me. I was comfortable in my routines, in my predictable life, but I was also playing it safe in ways that I didn't fully recognize at the time. I shopped at specific stores where I knew I could find my size, ate at restaurants where I knew the chairs would accommodate me comfortably, and avoided situations where I might face judgment or discrimination. I had developed an elaborate system of self-protection that kept me safe, but also kept me small, kept me hidden from the full potential of what my life could be. The immediate aftermath of that manager's cruel words felt like being caught in an emotional hurricane. As I stood there in that David's bridal store, surrounded by the shocked faces of strangers, I experienced a complex cascade of emotions that seemed to crash over me in waves. First came the shame, hot, burning shame that started in my chest and spread through my entire body like wildfire. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every flaw I had ever perceived about myself had been announced to the world through a megaphone. The humiliation was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just about my weight or my race individually, but the way this woman had weaponized both aspects of my identity to try to diminish me in front of a room full of people. I felt small, insignificant, like I had been reduced to nothing more than the prejudices and assumptions of someone who didn't even know me. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to clasp them together to try to regain some composure. But even that simple action felt impossible under the weight of so many staring eyes. Anger began to bubble up alongside the shame, but it was an anger I didn't know how to express. I had spent so many years being the good girl, the teacher who always maintained her composure, the woman who solved problems with kindness and patience rather than confrontation. I didn't have the tools or the experience to channel this rage into something productive in that moment. Instead, it felt like it was eating me alive from the inside, mixing with the humiliation to create a toxic cocktail of emotions that made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to know what to do next. But perhaps the most devastating emotion was the sense of worthlessness that began to creep in around the edges of my consciousness. This woman's words had activated every insecurity I had ever harbored about my body, my race, my place in the world. Suddenly, I was questioning everything. Was I wrong to think I deserved to wear something beautiful? Was I delusional to believe I had the right to shop in the same stores as everyone else? Had I been fooling myself all these years, thinking that I was worthy of love, respect, and basic human dignity? The physical symptoms were just as overwhelming as the emotional ones. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. My palms were sweating, my mouth was dry, and I felt dizzy, like I might faint right there on the carpeted floor of that bridal store. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, knew that my brown skin was probably showing the flush of embarrassment that I couldn't hide. My legs felt weak, unsteady, as if they might give out from under me at any moment. What made it even worse was the silence from the other customers. While that brave young woman was defending me with a ferocity that took my breath away, most of the other people in the store just stood there, watching like spectators at some kind of cruel entertainment. Their inaction felt almost as painful as the original attack, a reminder that in moments of crisis, many people will choose the safety of silence over the risk of standing up for what's right. Standing there in that David's bridal store, as the shock of the manager's words began to settle into my bones, my mind involuntarily began flashing back to other moments throughout my life when my size and race had made me a target for cruelty and discrimination. It was as if this one incident had opened a floodgate of painful memories that I had spent years trying to suppress, trying to move past, but that had never fully healed. I remembered being 12 years old, shopping for school clothes with my mother at a department store in downtown Atlanta. A saleswoman had followed us around the store, watching us with suspicious eyes, clearly assuming we were there to steal something. When my mother finally approached her to ask for help finding clothes in my size, the woman had looked me up and down with obvious disgust and said, "Maybe you should try the women's section. We don't really carry sizes for girls like her." My mother had been furious, But as a single parent working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, she didn't have the time or energy to fight every battle. We left that store empty-handed, and I wore the same 2 small clothes for another month until we could afford to shop somewhere else. High school had brought its own set of humiliations. I was a good student, honor roll every semester, active in the drama club and student government. But none of those achievements seemed to matter when it came to the social hierarchy that governed teenage life. I remember the day I decided to try out for the school's dance team, something I had been dreaming about since middle school. I had practiced for weeks, memorizing the routine, perfecting every step. But when I showed up for auditions, the coach took one look at me and said, "Sweetie, maybe you should consider being the team manager instead. We need someone reliable behind the scenes." I knew what she really meant. I wasn't thin enough, pretty enough, the right size to represent the school in that way. College had been better in many ways, but even there, I encountered moments that reminded me how others saw my body. I remember my sophomore year when I was excited to attend my first formal dance. I had found a beautiful dress at a plus-size store, saved money for months to buy matching shoes and accessories, and felt genuinely beautiful for the first time in years. But as I walked into the ballroom, I heard a group of fraternity guys making bets about who would be brave enough to dance with the fat girl. Their laughter followed me across the room, and I spent the entire evening sitting at a table with friends, pretending I didn't want to dance while watching everyone else enjoy themselves on the dance floor. Even in my professional life as a teacher, there had been incidents that reminded me how society viewed my body. During my first year teaching, a parent had requested that their child be moved to a different classroom because they were concerned that I wouldn't be a good role model, that I couldn't possibly teach their child about health and wellness when I clearly didn't take care of myself. The principal had supported me, but the words stung nonetheless, planting seeds of doubt about whether I was truly qualified to guide and inspire young minds. There were smaller moments too, countless interactions that individually seemed minor but collectively created a pattern of marginalization and othering. The airplane seats that were always too small, forcing me to ask for seatbelt extensions while other passengers watched and whispered. The restaurants where hostesses would automatically seat me at tables in the back, away from windows where I might be visible to people walking by. The doctor's appointments where every health concern was immediately attributed to my weight, regardless of the actual symptoms I was experiencing. Shopping had always been particularly challenging. I had learned to call stores in advance to ask if they carried my size, had developed a mental map of which retailers were likely to be welcoming versus those that would make me feel unwelcome. I had become an expert at online shopping, at ordering multiple sizes and returning what didn't fit, all to avoid the potential humiliation of trying to find clothes in physical stores where my size might not be available. As I watched this stranger, this incredible woman who had appeared like an angel in my darkest moment, continue to defend me with a passion I had never seen before, something began to shift inside me. She was going toe-to-toe with that manager, demanding to speak to corporate headquarters, insisting that this treatment was unacceptable and illegal. Her voice never wavered, her stance never faltered. And in her fierce advocacy, I began to see a reflection of who I could be, who I should have been all along. The turning point came when she turned to me, her eyes blazing with righteous anger but also filled with compassion, and said, "You deserve so much better than this. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect everywhere you go. And I'm going to make sure this never happens to you or anyone else in this store again." In that moment, I realized that I had been complicit in my own diminishment for years. I had accepted poor treatment, made excuses for other people's cruelty, and convinced myself that this was just the way the world worked for someone who looked like me. But seeing this woman, Sarah, I learned later, fight for me with such conviction made me realize that I had been wrong. I didn't have to accept discrimination. I didn't have to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I didn't have to apologize for taking up space in the world. For 35 years, I had been living according to other people's limited expectations of who I could be and what I deserved. But in that David's bridal store, surrounded by the aftermath of cruelty and the power of unexpected allyship, I began to understand that I had choices I had never fully explored. The manager eventually retreated to her office, muttering threats about calling security. But the damage to her authority had already been done. Other customers were taking pictures with their phones, clearly planning to share this story on social media. Sarah had already called David's bridal corporate office and was speaking to someone in their customer service department, calmly but firmly describing what had happened and demanding immediate action. She handed me the phone and encouraged me to tell my own story, to use my own voice to demand justice. As I spoke to that corporate representative, describing the humiliation and discrimination I had experienced, I felt something awakening inside me that had been dormant for decades. It was my voice. Not just my physical voice, but my authentic voice, the voice of someone who knew her worth and was willing to fight for it. I heard myself being articulate, powerful, demanding not just an apology, but concrete changes to ensure this wouldn't happen to other women like me. I heard myself refusing to accept empty promises and insisting on real accountability. The corporate representative was clearly disturbed by what they were hearing. They immediately connected me with a regional manager who offered profuse apologies, promised a full investigation, and assured me that this manager would face serious consequences for her actions. They offered to send a personal shopper to my home with a selection of dresses in my size, all free of charge. But more importantly, they listened when I told them that this wasn't just about me. It was about creating a culture of inclusion and respect for all women, regardless of their size or race. That conversation planted a seed that would grow into something much larger than I could have imagined at the time. As I hung up the phone and looked around that store, seeing other customers nodding in approval and hearing whispered comments of support, I realized that this moment had revealed something important, not just about the cruelty that exists in the world, but also about the power of standing up against it. Walking out of that David's bridal store with Sarah by my side, I felt like I was stepping into a completely different version of my life. She had insisted on driving me home, saying she wanted to make sure I was okay, but I think we both knew that what had just happened was bigger than either of us could fully process in that moment. As we sat in her car in my apartment complex parking lot, talking about what had just occurred, I made the first conscious decision that would set me on a path toward becoming someone I had never dreamed I could be. "I'm not going to let this happen to anyone else," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I don't know exactly what that means yet, but I can't just go back to my normal life and pretend this didn't happen. I won't let that woman or anyone like her have this kind of power over another woman ever again." Sarah smiled at me with genuine admiration and said something that I've never forgotten. "Maya, I think you just discovered your superpower. Now you get to decide what to do with it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the day, but instead of focusing on the humiliation and pain, I found myself thinking about the moment when I had spoken to that corporate representative with such clarity and authority. I had never heard that voice come out of me before, confident, demanding, unafraid. It was like discovering a hidden room in a house I had lived in my entire life. I lay in bed wondering what other capabilities I might have been hiding from myself, what other versions of Maya might be waiting to emerge if I was brave enough to let them. The next morning, I did something I had never done before in my 12 years of teaching. I called in a personal day, not because I was sick or had an appointment, but because I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what this transformation was going to look like. I spent hours researching David's Bridal's corporate policies, reading about discrimination laws, and looking up stories of other women who had faced similar treatment in retail settings. What I discovered was both devastating and empowering. This kind of discrimination was far more common than I had realized. But there were also legal protections and advocacy, organizations working to combat it. I reached out to the local NAACP chapter and spoke with a woman named Dorothy, who worked specifically on cases involving discrimination based on race and size. She was incredibly supportive and helped me understand my rights, but she also encouraged me to think beyond just this one incident. "You have a voice now," she told me. "You found your courage. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" She connected me with other women who had faced similar discrimination, and I began to understand that my experience, as painful as it had been, was part of a much larger pattern of systemic bias against women who didn't fit society's narrow definitions of acceptable femininity. That week, I also did something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I joined a gym, not because I thought I needed to lose weight to be worthy of respect, but because I wanted to reclaim my relationship with my body. I wanted to discover what my body could do, how strong it could be, how powerful it could make me feel. I had spent so many years seeing my body as something to hide, something to apologize for, that I had never explored its capabilities, its resilience, its potential for joy and strength. The gym was intimidating at first, filled with people who looked nothing like me, but I was determined to push through that discomfort. I hired a personal trainer named Marcus, a gentle giant of a man who specialized in working with clients who were new to fitness or who had experienced discrimination in other gym settings. He never once made me feel judged or inadequate. Instead, he helped me discover that my body was capable of amazing things, lifting weights I never thought I could handle, completing workout routines that challenged me in the best possible ways, and feeling strong and confident in a space where I had expected to feel weak and self-conscious. And you, plus-size woman who's watching, have you been through something similar? Share in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more empowerment stories. The transformation that began that day at David's Bridal started to reveal itself in ways I never could have anticipated. As I settled into my new routine at the gym with Marcus, I began to understand that physical strength and emotional strength were intimately connected in ways I had never realized. Every time I completed a workout that challenged me, every time I lifted a weight I thought was beyond my capabilities, every time I pushed through the voice in my head that said, "You can't do this," I was also building the mental and emotional muscles I would need to face the world with new confidence. Marcus was not just a personal trainer. He became a coach, a cheerleader, and sometimes a counselor. During our sessions, as I worked through sets of squats or deadlifts, he would share stories about other clients who had come to him feeling defeated by the world's judgment about their bodies and had discovered incredible strength they never knew they possessed. He helped me understand that strength comes in many forms, not just the ability to lift heavy objects, but the courage to speak up when you witness injustice, the determination to pursue your dreams despite obstacles, the wisdom to know your own worth regardless of what others think. About 3 weeks into my gym routine, something remarkable happened. I was working out on a particularly busy evening when I overheard 2 women making disparaging comments about my presence there. Instead of shrinking away as I might have done before, I found myself walking directly over to them. My heart was pounding, but I looked them in the eye and said calmly but firmly, "I belong here just as much as you do, and I'm going to continue working toward my goals regardless of your opinions." They were clearly shocked by my directness, muttering apologies before quickly moving to a different area of the gym. That interaction was a revelation. I realized that I had spent so many years anticipating rejection and discrimination that I had often retreated before anyone even had a chance to treat me poorly. By avoiding confrontation, I had also been avoiding opportunities for growth, for connection, for the chance to change hearts and minds through my presence and my refusal to be diminished. I began to understand that my strength wasn't just about what I could do with my body, but about how I chose to show up in the world. The confidence I was building at the gym began to spill over into other areas of my life. At school, I started speaking up more during faculty meetings, offering ideas and perspectives that I might have kept to herself before. My students noticed the change too. I was more animated in my teaching, more willing to take risks with creative lesson plans, more confident in my ability to handle challenging situations. One of my colleagues, Janet, mentioned that I seemed to be glowing with some kind of inner light that she hadn't seen before. I also began to reconnect with parts of myself that I had suppressed over the years. I had always loved to write, but had convinced myself that I didn't have anything important to say. Now, inspired by my experience at David's Bridal and the journey of self-discovery I was on, I started keeping a journal. What began as a way to process my own experiences gradually evolved into something more ambitious. I found myself writing about the experiences of other women like me, imagining their stories, giving voice to the struggles and triumphs of plus-size women of color who rarely saw themselves represented in mainstream media. The writing became a form of therapy, a way to make sense of not just what had happened to me, but what was happening to countless other women every day. I wrote about the teenager who was told she was too fat for the prom dress she loved, about the professional woman who was passed over for promotions because she didn't fit the company's image, about the mother who was shamed at her child's school event because of her size. But I also wrote about their resilience, their strength, their refusal to be defined by other people's limitations. One evening, about a month after the David's bridal incident, I was feeling particularly inspired after a great workout and decided to share one of my journal entries on social media. It was a piece about learning to take up space in the world without apologizing for it, about understanding that your worth isn't determined by the number on a scale or the size of your clothes. I posted it nervously, not sure if anyone would read it or care about what I had to say. The response to that first social media post was beyond anything I could have imagined. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times, and my inbox was flooded with messages from women telling me that my words had spoken directly to their hearts, that they felt seen and understood in a way they rarely experienced. Women from all over the country were reaching out, sharing their own stories of discrimination and resilience, thanking me for giving voice to experiences that they had thought were theirs alone to bear. Reading those messages was both heartbreaking and incredibly empowering. I realized that what had happened to me at David's bridal wasn't an isolated incident or a rare occurrence. It was part of a systematic pattern of discrimination that affected millions of women every day. But I also realized that by speaking up, by refusing to be silenced or diminished, I had the power to help other women feel less alone in their struggles and more empowered to fight back against injustice. Encouraged by the response to my writing, I decided to take a bigger step. I had been thinking about the conversation I'd had with Dorothy from the NAACP about using my voice for change, and I knew that one social media post, no matter how well received, wasn't enough. I wanted to create something more substantial, something that could have a lasting impact on how plus-size women were treated in retail settings, and beyond, I decided to organize what I called a Dignity Shopping Day, an event where plus-size women would go shopping together at stores that had reputations for discrimination or limited size options. The goal wasn't to cause trouble or create confrontations, but simply to exist in these spaces with confidence and solidarity, to make our presence known and our purchasing power felt. If we encountered discrimination, we would document it and report it. If we were treated well, we would celebrate that and give those businesses positive recognition. I created a Facebook group to organize the event, and within a week, over 200 women had joined. They came from all walks of life, teachers like me, nurses, lawyers, stay-at-home mothers, college students, retirees. But they all shared the common experience of having been made to feel unwelcome or unworthy because of their size. The energy in that virtual space was electric, filled with excitement about the possibility of shopping without shame, of supporting each other in spaces where they had previously felt isolated and vulnerable. The first Dignity Shopping Day was held at a large department store in downtown Atlanta that had a reputation for excellent customer service but limited plus-size options. About 30 women participated, and the experience was transformative for all of us. We moved through the store together, not as a mob, but as individuals who happened to be shopping at the same time, creating a visible presence that couldn't be ignored. When one woman couldn't find her size in a particular style, others would help her look, or suggest alternatives, or encourage her to ask for special orders. The store's response exceeded our expectations. Instead of treating us with suspicion or hostility, the staff embraced the opportunity to serve customers they clearly recognized as being underrepresented in their usual clientele. The manager on duty even approached me to ask about what sizes and styles would be most appreciated by customers like us, and several sales associates went above and beyond to help women find items that made them feel beautiful and confident. But perhaps the most powerful moment of the day came when a young woman named Keisha, who couldn't have been more than 19, broke down crying in the dressing room after trying on a dress that fit her perfectly. She told us later that it was the first time in her life she had found something beautiful in her size at a mainstream store, and that shopping with all of us had made her feel normal, accepted, valuable. In that moment, I knew that this was about so much more than shopping. It was about community, about belonging, about the radical act of refusing to hide from the world. The success of that first event led to more dignity shopping days in other cities, as women who had heard about our group organized similar events in their own communities. I found myself becoming the unofficial coordinator of a movement I had never intended to start, fielding calls from women across the country who wanted to organize their own events, from journalists who wanted to write about what we were doing, and from retailers who wanted to understand how they could better serve plus-size customers. As the dignity shopping movement grew beyond anything I had ever imagined, I found myself facing new challenges that tested my newfound confidence and resolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. The success of our events had attracted attention not just from supportive women and progressive retailers, but also from critics who questioned our methods, our message, and our very right to exist in public spaces without shame. The backlash came primarily through social media, where anonymous accounts would leave cruel comments on our group's posts, sharing before and after photos that mocked our appearances, and sending private messages filled with vile language about our bodies and our worth as human beings. At first, I was devastated by the cruelty of these attacks. I had known that not everyone would support what we were doing, but I hadn't been prepared for the level of hatred and vitriol that some people seemed to feel toward women who dared to love themselves at any size. The criticism wasn't just from random internet trolls either. Some people in my personal life began to express concerns about the attention I was attracting and the radical nature of what they saw as my new persona. My own mother, who had always been supportive but had also encouraged me to not rock the boat throughout my life, pulled me aside after seeing a local news story about one of our shopping events and said, "Maya, honey, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. But don't you think you're taking this a little too far? Some of these people criticizing you might have a point." Her words stung more than any anonymous internet comment ever could, because they came from someone I loved and respected. Someone whose approval had always mattered deeply to me. For a moment, I found myself questioning whether I had indeed gone too far, whether I was making a spectacle of myself and embarrassing the people who cared about me. But then I remembered Keisha's tears of joy in that dressing room. Remembered the messages from women who said our movement had literally saved their lives by helping them find self-worth and community. And I knew that the discomfort of some people was a small price to pay for the liberation of so many others. The challenges weren't just emotional and social, they were also practical. As the movement grew, so did the administrative demands of coordinating events, managing the social media accounts, responding to media requests, and handling the financial aspects of what was becoming a legitimate organization. I was still teaching full-time, still trying to maintain my personal relationships and my own self-care routines. And I was quickly becoming overwhelmed by the scope of what I had created. I realized that I needed help, but I also struggled with the idea of giving up control of something that felt so personal and important to me. This movement had grown out of my own pain and transformation, and I was terrified that bringing other people into leadership roles might change its essence or compromise its mission. But I was also exhausted, working 14-hour days and neglecting my own health and well-being in service of helping other women find theirs. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sarah, the woman who had defended me at David's bridal and had become one of my closest friends and advisors, suggested that I apply for a fellowship with a nonprofit organization that supported emerging social justice leaders. The fellowship would provide funding, mentorship, and administrative support for social entrepreneurs who were working on issues of equity and inclusion. At first, I dismissed the idea. I didn't see myself as a social entrepreneur or a leader in the traditional sense. I was just a teacher who had gotten angry about being treated poorly and had decided to do something about it. But Sarah persisted, helping me see that what I had created was indeed a legitimate social movement that deserved professional support and resources. She helped me put together an application that told the story of the dignity shopping movement, highlighted the impact we had already had on hundreds of women's lives, and outlined our vision for expanding into other areas of advocacy and support for plus-size women of color. The application process was intense, requiring me to articulate not just what we had accomplished, but what we hoped to accomplish in the future. I had to think strategically about issues I had only approached emotionally before, to consider the long-term sustainability of what we were doing and the measurable outcomes we could achieve with proper funding and support. It was the first time I had been forced to see myself as a leader rather than just an angry woman who refused to be treated poorly. The fellowship application process, challenging as it was, became an unexpected catalyst for another level of personal growth and self-acceptance. As I worked on articulating the vision and impact of the dignity shopping movement, I was forced to acknowledge something I had been reluctant to admit even to myself. I had become a leader, an advocate, a voice for change in ways that would have seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space was now commanding attention, demanding justice, and inspiring others to do the same. But true self-esteem, I was learning, wasn't just about external recognition or professional accomplishments. It was about developing an unshakable sense of my own worth that didn't depend on other people's approval or validation. This was perhaps the hardest lesson of all, because it meant confronting decades of internalized messages about my body, my race, my place in the world, and systematically replacing them with new truths that I had to choose to believe even when the world around me suggested otherwise. My therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams became crucial during this period. Dr. Williams was a Black woman in her 50s who specialized in working with women of color around issues of self-worth and empowerment. She helped me understand that the shame I had carried about my body for so many years wasn't really about my body at all. It was about the messages I had, internalized from a society that profits from women, feeling inadequate and unworthy. Every advertisement, every magazine cover, every movie or television show that portrayed only thin, conventionally attractive women as worthy of love and success had contributed to a narrative that I had unconsciously accepted as truth. The work of building authentic self-esteem, Dr. Williams told me during one session, isn't about convincing yourself that you're perfect or that everyone should love you. It's about recognizing your inherent worth as a human being, regardless of how you look or what anyone else thinks about you. It's about loving yourself enough to demand the respect and dignity you deserve. This concept was revolutionary for me because it separated my worth from my appearance, my achievements, or other people's opinions in a way I had never been able to do before. I began to develop daily practices that reinforced this new understanding of my worth. Every morning, I would look at myself in the mirror and say out loud 3 things I appreciated about myself that had nothing to do with my appearance: my kindness, my intelligence, my courage, my creativity. It felt awkward and forced at first, but over time, these affirmations became a natural part of my routine, and I found myself actually believing the words I was speaking. I also began to challenge the negative self-talk that had been my constant companion for decades. Whenever I caught myself thinking, "I'm too fat for this," or "no one will take me seriously because of how I look," I would consciously replace those thoughts with more accurate and compassionate ones. I deserve to be here, and my ideas and contributions have value regardless of my size. This mental shift didn't happen overnight, but with consistent practice, I began to notice that the volume of my inner critic was decreasing, while the voice of my inner advocate was growing stronger. The changes in my self-perception began to manifest in visible ways that surprised even me. I started wearing brighter colors, patterns that I had previously avoided because I thought they would draw attention to my size. I bought jewelry that made me feel beautiful, invested in skincare products that made me feel pampered and cared for, and began styling my hair in ways that expressed my personality rather than hiding behind conservative, professional looks that I had thought were more appropriate for someone who looked like me. Shopping for clothes became an entirely different experience. Instead of approaching it with dread and resignation, I began to see it as an opportunity to express my evolving sense of self. I learned to advocate for myself in stores, asking sales associates for help finding items in my size, requesting special orders when necessary, and walking away from retailers who couldn't or wouldn't serve me with respect and enthusiasm. I also discovered online retailers and boutiques that specialized in plus-size fashion, and I began to build a wardrobe that made me feel confident and beautiful rather than hidden and apologetic. Perhaps most importantly, I began to surround myself with people who saw and celebrated my full humanity. The friendships I had developed through the dignity shopping movement became some of the most meaningful relationships of my life. These women understood my journey because they were on similar paths themselves, and together we created a community where our worth was never questioned, where our dreams were supported, and where our successes were celebrated without qualification or condition. The fellowship application I had been working on was submitted in late fall, and while I waited to hear back, I continued to pour myself into the movement and into my own continued growth. The waiting period was anxious but also productive. I used the time to deepen my understanding of the issues we were working on, to build stronger relationships with the women in our community, and to continue the personal work of becoming the confident, empowered woman I was still learning to be. The response to our fellowship application came in the form of a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in January. I was in my classroom grading papers during my lunch break when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Maria Santos, the director of the fellowship program, and her first words were, "Maya, we were absolutely blown away by your application and the work you've been doing. We want to offer you a full fellowship, and we think what you're building has the potential to create systemic change on a national level." The fellowship came with a $50,000 grant, 6 months of intensive mentorship with established social justice leaders, and access to a network of resources and support that would allow me to expand the dignity shopping movement far beyond what I had ever imagined possible. But more than the financial support, the fellowship represented validation from the broader social justice community that what we were doing mattered, that it was legitimate, and that it deserved to be taken seriously as a force for change. With the fellowship resources, I was able to take a sabbatical from teaching to focus full-time on developing what we began calling the Dignity Project. Working with my mentors, I learned to think strategically about creating sustainable change rather than just organizing individual events. We developed a comprehensive approach that included not just the shopping events that had started it all, but also workshops for retailers on inclusive customer service, advocacy for policy changes that would protect consumers from discrimination, and support groups for women who had experienced trauma related to their size or appearance. One of the most innovative solutions we developed was the Dignity Ambassador Program. This involved training women from our community to work directly with retailers as consultants, helping them understand the needs and preferences of plus-size customers and develop more inclusive policies and practices. Instead of simply protesting discriminatory treatment, we were now offering concrete solutions and support to businesses that wanted to do better but didn't know how. The Ambassador Program was incredibly successful, in part because it approached the problem from a business perspective rather than just a moral one. We were able to show retailers that plus-size women represented a significant and underserved market, that treating us well wasn't just the right thing to do, but also good for their bottom line. We provided data on the spending power of plus-size consumers, case studies of businesses that had successfully expanded their size ranges and customer service approaches, and practical guidance on everything, from staff training to store layout to inventory management. We also developed partnerships with fashion designers and clothing manufacturers who were interested in creating more inclusive product lines. Many designers, we discovered, had wanted to expand into plus-size fashion but didn't know how to do it authentically or effectively. Our community became a valuable resource for these businesses, providing feedback on designs, fit, and marketing approaches that would resonate with plus-size consumers who had been ignored or poorly served by the fashion industry for too long. The digital component of our work expanded significantly as well. What had started as a simple Facebook group evolved into a comprehensive online platform that included resources for women dealing with discrimination, directories of size-inclusive businesses, forums for community support and connection, and educational content about body positivity, consumer rights, and social justice. We partnered with other organizations working on related issues to create a network of support that addressed not just shopping and fashion, but also healthcare, employment, housing, and other areas where size discrimination was common. One of the most meaningful solutions we developed was our mentorship program for young women. I remembered how isolated and hopeless I had felt as a teenager and young adult, believing that my size meant I was destined for a life of limitation and discrimination. We created opportunities for successful plus-size women in various fields to connect with girls and young women who were struggling with similar issues, providing role models and practical guidance that I wished I had at their age. The program included scholarships for young women pursuing education or training in fields where they might face additional challenges because of their size, workshops on self-advocacy and confidence building, and internship opportunities with businesses and organizations that had committed to size-inclusive practices. Seeing these young women develop confidence and ambition that I never had at their age was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of all the work we were doing. If you believe that obese women can achieve anything, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who needs empowerment. By the end of my fellowship year, the results of our work were becoming visible in ways that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. The Dignity Project had grown from a local Atlanta initiative to a national movement with active chapters in over 30 cities across the United States. We had trained more than 200 Dignity ambassadors who were working with retailers in their communities, and we had documented significant improvements in the customer service experiences of plus-size women at dozens of businesses that had participated in our training programs. The impact wasn't just anecdotal. We had been collecting data from the beginning, tracking everything from the number of size-inclusive businesses in participating cities to reports of discrimination from women in our community. The numbers told a compelling story of change. Complaints about discriminatory treatment in retail settings had decreased by 40% in cities with active Dignity Project chapters, and the number of businesses offering extended size ranges had increased by 25% in those same areas. But perhaps the most meaningful results were the individual transformations I witnessed in the women who had become part of our community. Women who had joined our movement feeling defeated and invisible were now starting businesses, pursuing advanced degrees, entering dating relationships, and taking on leadership roles in their professional and personal lives. The confidence they had gained through our work together was spilling over into every aspect of their lives, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the original scope of our mission. One story that particularly moved me was that of Angela, a 45-year-old nurse from Birmingham who had joined our community after being told by a potential employer that she didn't fit the image they wanted for their upscale medical practice. Angela had initially been quiet and hesitant in our group meetings, clearly struggling with deep-seated shame about her body and her worth. But over the course of several months, I watched her transform into a confident advocate, not just for herself, but for other women facing similar discrimination. Angela eventually decided to file a formal complaint against the medical practice that had rejected her. Working with lawyers, we had connected her with who specialized in employment discrimination. Not only did she win a substantial settlement, but the practice was required to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all their staff. Angela used her settlement money to go back to school to become a nurse practitioner, and she now runs her own practice that explicitly welcomes and celebrates patients of all sizes. The media attention our work was receiving also contributed to broader cultural conversations about size, discrimination, and body acceptance. I found myself being invited to speak at conferences, being interviewed for magazines and television shows, and being asked to contribute to academic research about weight stigma and its impacts. These platforms allowed me to reach women who might never have found our community otherwise, and they also helped legitimize our work in the eyes of policymakers and business leaders who had the power to create systemic change. One of the most gratifying moments came when David's Bridal, the same company where my journey had begun, reached out to ask if I would be willing to work with them on a comprehensive review of their customer service practices and size inclusivity policies. The manager who had humiliated me that day had been fired shortly after our incident, but the company wanted to go further, implementing systemic changes that would ensure such treatment never happened again. Working with David's Bridal was emotionally challenging, but ultimately incredibly rewarding. I was able to help them develop training programs for their staff, expand their size offerings, and create marketing campaigns that celebrated brides of all sizes. But more importantly, I was able to transform the site of my greatest humiliation into a place of healing and empowerment, not just for myself, but for thousands of other women who would be treated with dignity and respect because of the changes we implemented together. The success of our work with David's Bridal led to similar partnerships with other major retailers, and I began to see how individual acts of courage and advocacy could create waves of change that reached far beyond their original context. The woman who had once been too intimidated to ask for help finding clothes in her size was now sitting in corporate boardrooms, advising executives on how to better serve customers they had previously ignored or mistreated. As the Dignity Project continued to grow and evolve, one of the most unexpected and beautiful developments was watching the women in our community become leaders and advocates in their own right. What had started as a support network for women who had experienced discrimination was transforming into a launching pad for a new generation of activists, entrepreneurs, and changemakers who were taking our message of empowerment and dignity into their own communities and professional spheres. Linda, a 38-year-old accountant from Phoenix, had joined our movement after being passed over for a promotion she was clearly qualified for. Her supervisor had made comments suggesting that she didn't represent the company image they wanted to project to clients. Instead of accepting this discrimination quietly, Linda used the confidence and advocacy skills she had developed through our community to file a formal complaint with HR and ultimately pursue legal action against her employer. But Linda didn't stop there. She used her experience and her legal victory as the foundation for starting her own accounting firm that specialized in serving small businesses owned by women of color and other marginalized entrepreneurs. She explicitly advertised her practice as being size-inclusive and discrimination-free, and she made it a point to hire employees who reflected the diversity of the community she served. Within 2 years, her firm had grown to employ 12 people and was serving over 200 clients across Arizona and New Mexico. Similar stories were emerging from our chapters across the country. In Minneapolis, Cheryl had used her experience in our retail advocacy work to start a consulting business that helped companies develop more inclusive hiring and customer service practices. In Miami, Rosa had parlayed her leadership in our local chapter into a successful run for city council, where she was now working on anti-discrimination, ordinances that would protect people from bias based on weight and appearance. These women were taking the core principles of the Dignity Project, the belief that every person deserves to be treated with respect and has the right to take up space in the world without apology, and applying them to challenges and opportunities I had never even considered. They were proving that empowerment is contagious, that when you help one woman find her voice and her strength, she inevitably goes on to lift up others around her. The ripple effects were particularly powerful in the online space, where women from our community were creating content that reached audiences far beyond our formal membership. YouTube channels, Instagram accounts, blogs, and podcasts created by Dignity Project participants were reaching hundreds of thousands of people with messages of body positivity, self-advocacy, and empowerment. These platforms were creating representation and role models for plus-size women that simply hadn't existed when I was struggling with my own self-worth and confidence. One of the most successful of these content creators was Jasmine, a 29-year-old teacher from New Orleans who had started making videos about her own journey from shame to self-acceptance. Her channel, Big Girl, Big Dreams, now had over 500,000 subscribers and featured everything from fashion hauls showcasing plus-size clothing to interviews with successful plus-size women in various fields to practical advice about dealing with discrimination and building confidence. Jasmine's success had opened doors for her that went far beyond social media. She had been offered book deals, speaking engagements, and brand partnerships with companies that wanted to reach the plus-size market authentically. But what impressed me most about Jasmine was how she used her platform to amplify other voices from our community. regularly featuring other women's stories and directing her audience toward resources and organizations that could help them in their own journeys toward empowerment. The corporate world was beginning to take notice of what we were building as well. Companies that had previously ignored or poorly served plus-size consumers were now actively seeking partnerships with women from our community, recognizing that we represented not just a significant market opportunity but also a source of authentic expertise about what plus-size consumers actually wanted and needed. Found myself being invited to serve on advisory boards for fashion brands, consulting with advertising agencies on inclusive marketing campaigns, and speaking at business conferences about the importance of size diversity and inclusion. These opportunities allowed me to influence change at a systemic level, helping to reshape entire industries' approaches to serving customers who had been marginalized for too long. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of our impact was the letters and messages I received from women who had never formally joined our movement but had been inspired by our work to make changes in their own lives. These women wrote about standing up to employers who discriminated against them, leaving relationships that made them feel small and unworthy, pursuing dreams they had convinced themselves were impossible for someone who looked like them, and most importantly, teaching their daughters and other young women in their lives that their worth was not determined by their size or anyone else's opinion of their bodies. 3 years after that devastating day at David's Bridal, I found myself standing in the boardroom of a major fashion conglomerate in New York City, presenting a comprehensive plan for how they could authentically and profitably expand into the plus-size market. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman, who had once been told she didn't belong in a clothing store, was now being paid handsomely to advise some of the biggest names in fashion on how to better serve customers like her. The presentation went exceptionally well, and as I fielded questions from executives about market research, supply chain considerations, and marketing strategies, I realized how far I had traveled from the scared, ashamed woman I had been just a few years earlier. I was now fluent in the language of business, comfortable in spaces where I had previously felt unwelcome, and confident in my expertise in ways that would have seemed impossible before my transformation began. The success of that presentation led to a consulting contract worth more than I had made in my entire teaching career, and it opened doors to opportunities I had never even dreamed of pursuing. Fashion Week invitations, advisory board positions, speaking engagements at universities and conferences, media appearances on national television shows. My calendar was filling up with activities that bore no resemblance to the quiet, predictable life I had lived before. But as exciting as these new opportunities were, I was careful not to lose sight of the core mission that had started it all. Every contract I accepted, every partnership I entered into, every platform I was given had to advance the cause of dignity and inclusion for plus-size women. I turned down lucrative opportunities that would have required me to compromise my values or dilute my message, and I made sure that the success I was experiencing translated into more resources and opportunities for the women in our community. The Dignity Project itself was evolving as well, expanding beyond retail advocacy into areas like healthcare, employment, education, and media representation. We launched a healthcare initiative that trained medical professionals on providing respectful, effective care to plus-size patients, addressing the widespread problem of weight bias in medical settings that led to misdiagnoses, inadequate treatment, and avoidance of necessary care. Our employment advocacy work was helping plus-size women navigate workplace discrimination, providing legal resources, career coaching, and networking opportunities that helped level the playing field in professional environments where appearance bias was common. We partnered with companies that were committed to inclusive hiring practices and helped them develop policies and training programs that created more welcoming workplaces for employees of all sizes. The key educational component of our work included partnerships with schools and universities to address bullying and discrimination based on weight and appearance, as well as programs that taught young people about body diversity, self-acceptance, and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of how they looked. Media representation became another crucial focus area, as we worked with television producers, filmmakers, advertisers, and publishers to increase positive representation of plus-size women in all forms of media. Too often, when plus-size women appeared in movies or television shows, they were either the butt of jokes or the before picture in transformation stories. We advocated for complex, fully realized characters who happened to be plus-size, and we provided resources to help creators develop these characters authentically and respectfully. One of our most ambitious projects was the launch of the Dignity Institute, a research and training center that would serve as a hub for all our various initiatives, while also conducting academic research on weight stigma, size discrimination, and the effectiveness of various interventions designed to promote body acceptance and inclusion. The Institute would offer certificate programs for professionals who wanted to specialize in size-inclusive practices, conduct policy research that could inform anti-discrimination legislation, and serve as a resource for other organizations working on related issues. Securing funding for the Institute required me to stretch into new areas of expertise, learning about grant writing, major donor cultivation, and institutional partnerships in ways that challenged me professionally and personally. But the process also connected me with philanthropists, foundation program officers, and other social entrepreneurs who became valuable allies and advisors as our work continued to grow in scope and impact. Do you see how a determined overweight woman can change not only her life but other people's lives? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this. As the Dignity Project grew into a national movement with significant influence and resources, we inevitably faced challenges that tested everything we had built and forced us to prove the depth of our commitment to our values. The most serious crisis came in our 4th year, when a well-funded campaign emerged that was specifically designed to discredit our work and undermine the progress we had made towards size, acceptance, and inclusion. The opposition was sophisticated and well-organized, funded by interests that profited from women's insecurity about their bodies, diet companies, weight loss programs, and even some segments of the fashion industry that preferred to maintain artificial scarcity around size options rather than expand their offerings. They launched a coordinated attack that combined social media campaigns spreading misinformation about our work with targeted harassment of our leaders and efforts to pressure our corporate partners to end their relationships with us. The personal attacks on me were particularly vicious, dredging up old photos from before my transformation and using them to mock my appearance and question my credibility as a spokesperson for body acceptance. They created fake social media accounts that spread lies about my background, my motivations, and my qualifications. They even targeted my former employer, pressuring the school district to distance themselves from my advocacy, work, and suggesting that I was somehow unfit to have been trusted with educating children. The harassment campaign was designed to be exhausting and demoralizing, and for a while, it worked. I found myself spending hours each day responding to false accusations, correcting misinformation, and defending not just my work, but my basic humanity. The stress was taking a toll on my health, my relationships, and my ability to focus on the positive work we were trying to do. There were moments when I seriously considered stepping back from public leadership of the movement, wondering if my continued visibility was doing more harm than good, but the response from our community reminded me why this work was so important and gave me the strength to persevere. Through the darkest period of the campaign against us, women from across the country rallied to defend not just me personally, but the principles and progress we represented. They organized counter-campaigns on social media, shared their own stories of transformation and empowerment, and demonstrated the real-world impact our work had had on their lives. Corporate partners who had been pressured to distance themselves from us instead doubled down on their commitments, issuing public statements about their values and their dedication to serving customers of all sizes. Several major retailers actually expanded their partnerships with us during this period, recognizing that the attack campaign had inadvertently highlighted the importance and legitimacy of our work. The harassment campaign also backfired in another unexpected way. It attracted the attention of journalists and researchers who began investigating the sources of funding behind the attacks. What they discovered was a network of organizations with clear financial interests in maintaining the status quo around body shame and size discrimination. The exposure of this coordinated effort to silence body-positive advocacy actually strengthened our credibility and brought new allies to our cause. Legal action became necessary when the harassment crossed the line into defamation and threats of physical violence. Working with attorneys who specialized in civil rights and First Amendment issues, we were able to shut down the most egregious attacks and hold some of the perpetrators accountable for their actions. The legal victories sent a clear message that attempts to silence advocacy through intimidation and harassment would not be tolerated. The crisis also forced us to strengthen our own infrastructure and security, measures in ways that made our organization more resilient and effective. We developed better protocols for handling attacks and controversies, created support systems for leaders who were being targeted, and built partnerships with other social justice organizations that helped us weather the storm and emerge stronger than before. Perhaps most importantly, the experience taught me and other leaders in our movement that resistance and backlash are often signs that you're making meaningful progress towards systemic change. The fact that powerful interests felt threatened enough by our work to mount such an extensive campaign against us was actually evidence of our effectiveness and influence. The resolution of the crisis came when several major news outlets published investigative pieces exposing the funding and coordination behind the harassment campaign. Public opinion shifted decisively in our favor, and many of the organizations that had been attacking us quietly ended their campaigns rather than face continued scrutiny. We emerged from the experience with our credibility enhanced, our community more unified, and our resolve strengthened to continue the important work of creating a world where all women could live with dignity and respect regardless of their size. 5 years after that humiliating experience at David's Bridal, I stood before an audience of 2,000 people at the largest body positivity conference ever held in the United States. As the keynote speaker, I was sharing the stage with activists, researchers, and advocates who had been working on these issues for decades. Yet somehow I had become recognized as one of the leading voices in the movement for size, acceptance, and dignity for all bodies. The transformation in my own life was so complete that sometimes I had to remind myself that the confident woman speaking to this enthusiastic audience was the same person who had once hidden in the back of clothing stores, hoping not to be noticed or judged. The woman on that stage wore a beautiful, bright red dress that fit perfectly and made her feel powerful and radiant. She spoke without notes, connecting effortlessly with her audience, sharing painful truths and inspiring visions with equal skill and passion. But the real measure of transformation wasn't in my personal confidence or professional success. It was in the systemic changes that our movement had helped create across the country. The Dignity Project, now operated in 150 cities, had trained over 5,000 retail workers in inclusive customer service and had partnered with more than 500 businesses to improve their size-inclusive practices. We had documented measurable decreases in reported discrimination in participating communities and had helped pass anti-discrimination legislation in 12 states. The Dignity Institute had become a nationally recognized center for research and training on weight stigma and size inclusion. Our certificate programs were training the next generation of professionals who would work to eliminate bias in healthcare, education, employment, and other critical areas. Our research was being cited in academic journals, used to inform policy decisions, and helping to shift cultural conversations about body diversity and acceptance. The financial transformation was equally remarkable. What had started as an entirely volunteer effort, funded by my modest teacher's salary, had become a multi-million-dollar organization with professional staff, comprehensive programs, and sustainable funding from foundations, individual donors, and corporate partnerships. I had been able to leave teaching and focus full-time on this work, and I was earning more than I had ever imagined possible while doing work that aligned perfectly with my values and passions. More importantly, the Dignity Project had created economic opportunities for hundreds of women in our community. Our ambassador program now employed over 200 women as consultants and trainers. Our online marketplace featured products from dozens of plus-size women entrepreneurs. Our conferences and events created speaking and workshop opportunities for community members who had developed expertise in various aspects of size acceptance and body positivity. The Personal transformation in my life extended beyond my professional accomplishments to include relationships and experiences I had never thought possible. I had fallen in love with Michael, a photographer who specialized in portrait work with plus-size subjects and who saw my body as beautiful exactly as it was. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine attraction, things I had convinced myself were impossible for someone who looked like me. I had also reconnected with family members who had been distant during my years of hiding and self-doubt. My mother, who had initially been concerned about the attention I was attracting, had become one of my proudest supporters, volunteering with our local chapter and sharing my story with anyone who would listen. My cousins and other relatives had seen how my confidence and success had transformed not just my own life, but had inspired changes in their lives as well. Travel had become a regular part of my life as I spoke at conferences, consulted with organizations, and visited Dignity Project chapters across the country and internationally. I had been invited to speak in Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and several other countries where similar movements were emerging. These experiences had broadened my perspective on body diversity and discrimination as global issues, while also showing me how the specific work we were doing in the United States could serve as a model for advocates in other contexts. The speaking and consulting work had also allowed me to meet and collaborate with other leaders in the social justice movement, expanding my understanding of how size discrimination intersected with other forms of bias and oppression. I had developed friendships and working relationships with advocates for racial justice, LGBTQ+ rights, disability rights, and economic justice, learning how our movements could support and strengthen each other's work. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my personal transformation was the relationship I had developed with my own body. The woman who had once seen her body as an obstacle to overcome or hide had learned to appreciate it as the vehicle for her life's work, the source of her strength, and something worthy of care, respect, and celebration. I had developed a fitness routine that focused on strength and enjoyment rather than weight loss, had learned to dress in ways that expressed my personality and made me feel powerful, and had cultivated a sense of physical confidence that influenced every other aspect of my life. By our 7th year of operation, the Dignity Project had achieved outcomes that exceeded even our most ambitious early goals. We had successfully pressured major fashion retailers to expand their size ranges, with over 200 national brands now carrying sizes that had been unavailable when our movement began. Airlines had implemented more inclusive seating policies, healthcare systems had adopted size-neutral treatment protocols, and employers across multiple industries had updated their hiring and workplace policies to prevent size-based discrimination. The policy victories were particularly meaningful because they represented permanent, systemic changes that would benefit women for generations to come. The Size Discrimination Prevention Act, which we had helped draft and advocate for, had been passed in 8 states and was under consideration in 12 others. This legislation explicitly prohibited discrimination based on weight or size in employment, housing, and public accommodations, providing legal recourse for people who faced the kind of treatment I had experienced at David's Bridal. Our advocacy work had also influenced federal policy, with several government agencies updating their anti-discrimination guidelines to include weight and appearance-based bias. The Department of Health and Human Services had adopted new standards for respectful treatment of plus-size patients in federally funded healthcare programs, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had issued guidance clarifying that weight-based discrimination could constitute illegal bias under existing civil rights laws. The cultural impact of our work was perhaps even more significant than the policy changes. The conversations we had started about body diversity, dignity, and inclusion had become mainstream, with major media outlets regularly covering issues related to size acceptance and weight stigma. Television shows and movies were featuring more diverse body types in leading roles, and advertising campaigns were increasingly showcasing models of all sizes rather than just the extremely thin ideal that had dominated for decades. The academic world had taken notice as well, with universities establishing research centers focused on weight stigma and body acceptance, offering courses on size diversity and inclusion, and producing scholarship that supported the arguments we had been making about the harmful effects of size discrimination. I had been invited to serve as a visiting lecturer at several prestigious universities, and the Dignity Institute had established partnerships with academic institutions that were conducting groundbreaking research on these issues. International recognition had come through invitations to speak at United Nations events about human rights and dignity, participation in global conferences on social justice and equality, and partnerships with advocacy organizations in other countries that were adapting our models to their own cultural contexts. The movement we had started in response to one woman's humiliation in an Atlanta bridal store had become part of a worldwide effort to promote body, acceptance, and human dignity. The business community had embraced our work in ways that surprised even our most optimistic supporters. Companies were competing to demonstrate their commitment to size inclusion, with annual reports now routinely featuring diversity metrics that included body size representation among employees and customers. Business schools were offering courses on inclusive marketing and size-diverse consumer bases, and consulting firms specializing in diversity and inclusion had added size acceptance expertise to their service offerings. My personal achievements had grown alongside the movement's success. I had been recognized with numerous awards for social entrepreneurship and advocacy, including being named one of Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People and receiving honorary doctorates from 3 universities. My memoir, Finding My Size from Shame to Strength, had become a bestseller and had been optioned for a television adaptation. The speaking circuit had taken me around the world, sharing our story with audiences on every continent and inspiring similar movements in countries where size discrimination was endemic but had never been effectively challenged. These international experiences had broadened my understanding of how cultural attitudes toward body size varied across different societies, while also revealing the universal nature of the human need for dignity and acceptance. But perhaps the achievement I was most proud of was the establishment of the Dignity Scholarship Fund, which had provided educational opportunities for over 1,000 young women who had faced discrimination because of their size. These scholarships weren't just financial support. They came with mentorship, networking opportunities, and access to a community of successful women who understood the unique challenges these students might face as they pursued their dreams. The scholarship recipients were now beginning to graduate and enter their chosen fields, carrying forward the values and principles of our movement into the next generation. They were becoming teachers, doctors, lawyers, business leaders, artists, and activists, and they were doing so with a confidence and sense of possibility that I wished I had had at their age. Watching these young women step into their power and claim their place in the world was perhaps the most satisfying outcome of all the work we had done. The recognition our movement received culminated in an invitation that still takes my breath away when I think about it. The White House had asked me to serve on a new federal task force addressing discrimination and bias in healthcare, employment, and public accommodations. The task force was charged with developing comprehensive recommendations for federal policy changes that would protect Americans from discrimination based on appearance, including weight and size. Sitting in that first meeting in the Roosevelt Room, surrounded by other advocates, policy experts, and government officials, I was overwhelmed by the realization of how far we had traveled from that devastating day at David's bridal. The woman who had once been told she didn't belong in a clothing store was now helping to shape federal policy that would protect millions of Americans from similar treatment. The task force work was intensive and challenging, requiring me to master complex policy details and navigate the intricate world of federal bureaucracy. But it was also incredibly rewarding, offering the opportunity to create lasting change at the highest levels of government. Our recommendations ultimately became the foundation for new federal anti-discrimination guidelines and informed legislation that was introduced in Congress with bipartisan support. The media attention surrounding my appointment to the task force brought renewed focus to our movement and introduced our work to audiences who might never have encountered it otherwise. I appeared on major television programs, was featured in national magazines, and was interviewed by journalists from around the world who were covering the growing movement. for body acceptance and size inclusion, but the recognition that meant the most to me came from the women whose lives had been changed by our work. The letters, emails, and social media messages I received daily told stories of transformation that went far beyond anything I could have imagined when our movement began. Women wrote about leaving abusive relationships because they had learned they deserved better treatment. Mothers shared stories of raising daughters who loved their bodies and believed in their own worth. Professionals described career advances they had achieved after learning to advocate for themselves in workplace settings. One letter that particularly moved me came from a young woman named Crystal who had been in high school when she first discovered our movement through social media. She had been severely bullied because of her size and had been contemplating suicide when she found our community online. Our message of dignity and self-worth had literally saved her life. She wrote, and she was now in her senior year of college, studying to become a social worker so she could help other young people facing similar struggles. The academic recognition of our work had led to research collaborations that were producing important scholarship about weight stigma, body image, and the effectiveness of advocacy interventions. Studies documenting the impact of our programs were being published in peer-reviewed journals, providing evidence-based support for the approaches we had developed through trial and error in our early years. The corporate partnerships we had developed were yielding tangible benefits for plus-size consumers across multiple industries. Clothing retailers were not only offering extended size ranges, but were also featuring plus-size models in their advertising campaigns and training their staff to provide excellent customer service to customers of all sizes. Airlines had implemented more inclusive seating policies and had redesigned some aircraft configurations to better accommodate passengers of various body types. Healthcare systems that had partnered with us were reporting improved patient satisfaction scores and better health outcomes for plus-size patients as their staff learned to provide respectful, effective care without weight bias. Employment discrimination complaints related to size and appearance had decreased significantly in cities where our workplace advocacy programs were active, and several major corporations had cited our training programs as key components of their diversity and inclusion initiatives. The ripple effects of our work were visible in popular culture as well, with television shows, movies, and social media platforms featuring more diverse body representation than had ever been seen before. Fashion weeks in major cities now routinely included plus-size models on the runway, and several plus-size women from our community had become successful models, designers, and influencers who were changing the industry from within. Educational institutions were implementing anti-bullying programs based on our research and training materials, and we were seeing measurable decreases in weight-based bullying and harassment in schools that had adopted our curricula. University campuses were establishing support groups and resources for plus-size students, and several colleges had updated their facilities and policies to be more inclusive of students of all body sizes. International expansion of our work had led to the establishment of sister organizations in 7 countries, each adapted to their local cultural contexts, but sharing our core commitment to dignity and inclusion for people of all sizes. These international partners were achieving their own policy victories and cultural changes, creating a global network of advocates working toward body acceptance and size justice. Perhaps most importantly, the economic empowerment aspect of our work was creating lasting change in the lives of individual women. Our entrepreneur support programs had helped launch over 300 businesses owned by plus-size women, from fashion designers and personal trainers to consultants and technology innovators. These businesses were not only providing economic opportunities for their owners, but were also creating employment opportunities for other women in our community and contributing to the broader goal of economic justice and empowerment. The transformation in my own life had become a template that other women were adapting to their own circumstances and goals. The confidence, advocacy skills, and professional networks that I had developed through this journey were tools that could be applied to any number of challenges and opportunities. Women in our community were using these tools to pursue advanced degrees, change careers, start families, leave unhealthy relationships, and achieve goals they had previously thought were impossible for someone who looked like them. Standing in my beautiful home office 8 years after that life-changing day at David's bridal, I often pause to reflect on the woman I have become and marvel at the journey that brought me here. The space around me tells the story of this transformation. Walls lined with awards and recognition, bookshelves filled with works by and about women who refuse to be diminished by society's expectations, and photographs capturing moments of triumph and connection with the incredible community we have built together. The woman sitting at this desk bears little resemblance to the ashamed, apologetic person who once tried to make herself invisible in public spaces. I move through the world now with a confidence that is unshakable because it comes from within, from a deep knowledge of my own worth that no external criticism or rejection can diminish. I wear clothes that express my personality and make me feel powerful. I speak up without hesitation when I witness injustice, and I take up space in the world without apology or shame. My relationship with my body has been perhaps the most profound aspect of my personal transformation. The body that I once saw as an obstacle has become my greatest ally in the work I do every day. It carries me to speaking engagements where I inspire thousands of women to believe in their own worth. It allows me to demonstrate strength and vitality that challenges stereotypes about health and fitness at larger sizes. It serves as living proof that beauty, success, and happiness are not limited to any particular body type or size. The fitness routine I maintain is focused on strength, flexibility, and joy rather than weight loss or conforming to external standards. I work out because it makes me feel strong and energized, because it helps me manage stress, and because I genuinely enjoy the challenge of pushing my body to do new things. The gym that once felt like hostile territory has become a sanctuary where I celebrate what my body can accomplish rather than criticizing what it looks like. My relationship with food has been transformed as well, moving from a complicated mix of shame, restriction, and emotional eating to a healthy, intuitive approach that honors both nutrition and pleasure. I eat foods that nourish my body and soul. I enjoy meals with friends and family without guilt or anxiety. And I have learned to trust my body's signals about hunger, fullness, and satisfaction. Food is no longer the enemy. It's fuel for the important work I do, and one of life's many pleasures to be enjoyed mindfully and joyfully. The professional success I have achieved has exceeded anything I ever imagined possible, but more importantly, it represents work that aligns perfectly with my values and passions. Every day brings opportunities to make a meaningful difference in women's lives, to challenge unjust systems, and to create a more inclusive and equitable world. The financial security that has come with this success has allowed me to be generous with others, to take risks for the greater good, and to live without the constant worry about money that had constrained so many of my choices in earlier years. My personal relationships have flourished as well, as I have learned to attract and maintain connections with people who see and value my full humanity. My marriage to Michael has been a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love that has nothing to do with conforming to conventional beauty standards. Our relationship has shown me that love is indeed possible for women of all sizes, and that the right person will be attracted to confidence, kindness, intelligence, and authenticity rather than a number on a scale. The friendships I have developed through this journey have become some of the most meaningful relationships of my life. The women I have met through the Dignity Project understand my experiences in ways that create instant bonds of trust and support. We celebrate each other's successes without jealousy. We support each other through challenges without judgment. And we have created a chosen family that provides the unconditional love and acceptance that everyone deserves. My relationship with my birth family has also been transformed, as my confidence and success have inspired changes in their own lives and perspectives. My mother, who once worried about the attention I was attracting, now serves as a volunteer coordinator for our local chapter and regularly shares my story with pride. My cousins and other relatives have seen how my transformation has affected not just my own life, but has created opportunities and inspiration for their own growth and empowerment. The spiritual dimension of my transformation has been equally profound, as I have developed a deeper understanding of my purpose in the world and my connection to something larger than myself. The work I do feels like a calling rather than just a career, and I approach each day with gratitude for the opportunities I have been given to make a difference. I have learned to see challenges as opportunities for growth, setbacks as temporary detours rather than permanent failures, and success as a responsibility to lift others up alongside me. If you also believe in the transformative power of plus-size women, leave your like and comment on how this story inspired you. As I bring this story to a close, I want to speak directly to every woman who is watching this video and seeing herself in the journey I have shared with you today. If you are a plus-size woman who has ever been made to feel less than worthy because of your size, if you have ever been told that you don't belong somewhere or that you should hide yourself from the world, if you have ever looked in the mirror and seen only flaws instead of the magnificent, powerful, deserving woman that you truly are, this message is for you. Your worth is not determined by the number on a scale, the size of your clothes, or anyone else's opinion about your body. You are worthy of love, respect, dignity, and every opportunity that life has to offer simply because you exist. Because you are a human being with inherent value that cannot be diminished by anyone's prejudices or limitations. The woman who told me I didn't belong in that David's bridal store was wrong about me, and anyone who has ever made you feel unworthy is wrong about you too. The transformation that began for me that day, 8 years ago, is available to every woman who chooses to claim it. It doesn't require you to change your body, lose weight, or conform to anyone else's standards of acceptability. It requires only that you choose to see yourself as worthy, that you decide to take up space in the world without apology, and that you commit to treating yourself with the same kindness and respect that you would offer to a beloved friend. The journey won't always be easy. There will be people who try to diminish you, systems that attempt to exclude you, and moments when you doubt your own worth and strength. But I promise you that every step you take towards self-acceptance and empowerment creates a path that other women can follow. Every time you speak up for yourself, every time you refuse to accept poor treatment, every time you pursue a dream that others say is impossible for someone who looks like you are not just transforming your own life. You are contributing to a movement that is changing the world for all women. The Dignity Project exists because one woman decided that she deserved better treatment than she received in a clothing store. It has grown into a national movement because thousands of women decided to join her in demanding dignity and respect. But the real power of our movement doesn't lie in our organizational structure, our policy victories, or our media recognition. It lies in the individual transformations of women who choose to love themselves, advocate for themselves, and support other women in doing the same. You don't need to wait for permission to begin your own transformation. You don't need to join an organization, attend a workshop, or read a book to start treating yourself with the respect you deserve. You can begin right now, in this moment, by making a commitment to yourself that you will no longer accept being treated as less than the magnificent woman you are. Start by changing the conversation in your own head. Replace the critical voice that focuses on your flaws with a compassionate voice that celebrates your strengths. Surround yourself with people who see and value your full humanity rather than those who make you feel small. Pursue opportunities that excite you rather than limiting yourself based on what you think is possible for someone who looks like you. Most importantly, remember that your story is still being written. The chapters that brought you to this moment, including the painful ones filled with rejection, discrimination, and self-doubt, are not the end of your story. They are the foundation for the chapters to come, chapters that can be filled with joy, success, love, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living authentically as the woman you were always meant to be. The world needs what you have to offer. Your voice, your perspective, your talents, your dreams, they all matter, and they all deserve to be shared with the world. Don't let anyone convince you that your size disqualifies you from greatness, because some of the most powerful, influential, and beloved women in history have been plus-size women who refuse to be diminished by others' limitations. 8 years ago, a cruel woman in a bridal store tried to make me disappear, tried to convince me that I didn't belong in her world. Today, I stand as living proof that her vision of the world was too small, too narrow, too limited to contain the magnificence of women like us. We do belong, everywhere, in every space, in every opportunity that life has to offer. And we will continue to show up, speak up, and take up space until every woman knows and believes in her own inherent worth. Your transformation begins the moment you decide that you deserve better. Your empowerment begins the moment you choose to see yourself as worthy. Your revolution begins the moment you refuse to apologize for taking up space in this world. That moment can be right now if you choose to make it so. If this empowerment story touched your soul, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, share with someone special, and write in the comments which city and country you're watching from.